Donald Trump's pick for Environmental Protection Agency administrator is a staunch climate change denier, giving Democrats and environmental groups whiplash after Trump's highly publicized meetings with prominent climate change activists.
This is embarrassing.
Yeah, giving him whiplash, I'd say. Al Gore walks out the front door of Trump Tower and says nice things about Donald Trump, and 2 hours later, Donald Trump appoints the Attorney General from Oklahoma, Scott Pruitt, to be the head of the EPA. I'll bet the large turbine engines on Al Gore's private jet hadn't even warmed up yet when that announcement was made. Wonder how that made him feel. And he was fuming on top of all of those carbon fumes he was burning, flying back to wherever it is he lives now. Probably in a mansion somewhere with a very large carbon footprint, wouldn't you say? Way to go, Al. I love these picks so far, but what I wanted to do was find out a little bit more about Scott Pruitt. I mean, he's from a neighboring state, but quite frankly, I was aware of some lawsuits that he had been involved in against the EPA. But I've asked Randy Eminger to join us today. He's the executive director of the Energy Policy Network. It's a trade association that works with a lot of folks in the coal industry and the energy industry. Randy, how are you?
I'm good, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Good to have you here, and glad you could be a guest today. Tell me about your reaction, first of all, to hearing the news that Scott Pruitt was picked to head the EPA.
Mark, I think he's an excellent pick. I think he's exactly what our nation needs at this time. He has two key, I think, things going for him. One, institutional knowledge of the environmental issues, because he's worked with a number of AGs across the U.S. For the last 6-7 years. And he's got a great legal mind as well. So I see him as a great pick because he knows both the legal aspects of the EPA and environmental issues, and he knows the ins and outs of the issues themselves.
People here in the St. Louis area, which includes not only Missouri but southern Illinois, know firsthand what this current administration's EPA regulations and rules have done to the coal industry. We've seen plants shut down and lay people off. We've seen Peabody Coal have to file for bankruptcy. They're well aware of what some of these regulations are. What do you see as before we get to Mr. Pruitt for a minute, what do you see as the most damaging actions by this administration when it comes to the energy industry?
Well, the current administration basically, I think, disregarded Congress and the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. The elements that are out there that have been a part of our mainstay, that the coal fuel power plants or natural gas or all of our industry have been complying with. The current administration decided to scrap all of that and go with executive orders to put in place. Basically, they called it the Clean Power Plan, but it might as well be the Kill Coal Plan, which was supplying over 50% of our electricity and is now about 32% currently. But it has been devastating, I think, because the consumers of Missouri or the entire U.S. have paid for those power plants. It's low-cost, reliable electricity. And now they're having to close those plants.
Yeah, they are. Now, when it comes to that Clean Power Plan, Scott Pruitt helped lead the charge in challenging that. Tell us about that.
He did. Actually, he worked with fellow attorney generals, not just Republicans, but Democrats alike across the U.S. There were a record number, 27 states, that joined a lawsuit led by General Pruitt to sue the EPA over the Clean Power Plan, and also an additional plan called the Waters of the U.S. Plan, which EPA was trying to take control of all what they considered navigable waters, which could be anything from water running down a ditch. So it was very much a federal power grab. So he is very much aware of those issues and very on top of what needs to take place to roll some of those back.
Yeah, it seems like I'm trying to remember, we had an issue even here in Missouri with that navigable waters issue. and now you've got somebody who's going to be in charge. I mean, you've worked side by side with Mr. Pruitt as Attorney General. What is your impression of him?
His integrity is impeccable. He's very good, and I know there are a lot of groups out there that have real problems. You've seen a number of organizations recently tweet and send articles out saying he's going to be a disaster. Earth Justice, Greenpeace said he's a threat to the planet. But in all honesty, my view is that he's going to bring some balance back. You know, it's one thing to protect the environment. It's another to take freedoms away and ruin our economy. And I think to some extent our way of life in the U.S. has been damaged what's happened over the past 8 years. So I think General Pruitt, knowing his intelligence, knowing his knowledge of the issues, he's going to be a perfect pick for this administration.
Randy Eminger is the executive director of the Energy Policy Network. You know, you bring up a good point. The people that oppose Scott Pruitt or what he might believe in would lead you to believe that if you don't agree with them, you somehow hate the environment and want to damage it.
That's exactly right. And what they don't take into consideration, especially on issues such as climate change, man-made contribution to that is very small, if any, and General Pruitt knows those issues, and I know they're very concerned about that. Then we also need to look at, as the president-elect is looking at, is what's our competition with China? And if we continue to destroy our economy and industry in the U.S., and China goes right ahead and is emitting tons of emissions into the atmosphere, what do we gain? So I think there's going to be some a look at that as well from an international perspective.
Well, I hope so, because that's just one big transfer of wealth waiting to happen. So hopefully Donald Trump, combined with Scott Pruitt, can get in there and look at this thing and figure out a way out of what the president has tried to commit us to already. Let me move over to a minute to these federal leasing programs, because my impression, the complaint I've heard from energy groups is that over the past 7.5 years, the Obama administration has made a concerted effort to shut off access to millions of acres of federal land, and to make it difficult for companies that already have leases to renew those leases. Is that the case, and what are you hoping for moving forward?
Well, that's exactly the case, Mark. And what we've had, as you know, large sections of the western states are tied up with federal land. And through the decades, oil and gas has operated, and coal mining, other mining as well. It's a great revenue source for the federal government. The leasing, the ad valorem, the severance taxes that go to the federal government because they are on federal lands. What's happened is there's a big movement, a group called Keep It in the Ground, well-funded group that has been working hard to get Obama and the EPA to look at stopping all federal leases in the West, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's coal, anything fossil fuel. So what we've had is a situation is a threat to continuing to operate. You might have had a 10-year permit, and that permit's coming up for renewal. Under the Obama administration, the Department of Interior was looking at not renewing any of those future leases. So it would have devastated our fossil fuel industry in the U.S.
Another example, just like a conservative group trying to go to the EPA to get tax consideration. This was an intentional effort on the part of the people in this administration to hinder these folks from doing jobs they've been doing for years. With I think back to Sarah Palin and the call for drill, baby, drill. So we know there are vast expanses of oil and other natural resources on federal lands that we should be able to get to, that aren't going to damage the environment, that aren't going to harm animals, and yet this administration has just shut that down.
And these industries are meeting or beating all existing environmental regulations. It's not like they're going unregulated. We have numerous environmental regulations that are out there associated with mining, with oil and gas extraction. And so we're being a good neighbor, doing the right thing, but at the same time looking at losing those leases.
Absolutely. Randy Eminger, listen, I appreciate your time. Is there a place, can people go to the Energy Policy Network website to find out more about what you do?
Yes, just www.energypolicynetwork.org, and be happy for folks to look at that and join in. We have a large number of individuals that are members of our organization.
Randy Eminger, listen, thanks for your time today and your thoughts on Scott Pruitt.
Thank you, Mark.
Absolutely. Take care of yourself. Appreciate getting Randy on here. He's worked side by side with the current Attorney General in the state of Oklahoma. Also, he's worked in Missouri and throughout the West, helping these energy companies and working with them to try for some common sense policy when it comes to this. I mean, quite frankly, folks, even if you're green-minded and you've got a Prius or you've got a Chevy Volt and you take it home every night and you plug it into the wall, it's a coal-burning power plant that's powering it. And these restrictions to put these people out of business, it's dangerous. And hopefully we're about to turn that around.